Welcome to the show, Doctor2Doctor in the Chatroom. We are so happy to have you guys back with us another Saturday to share this hour. As we always say, it is because of you coming back each Saturday that we are able to do this, and we're able to bring you those topics that impact our communities and our world. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And speaking of our communities and our world, they've been recently shaken by another senseless act of killing at the hands of the very folk that have been assigned to protect us. As you recall, on January 7th, there was a traffic stop that occurred in Memphis where police officers brutally beat 29-year-old Tyre Nichols. He was taken to the hospital and 3 days later died as a result of those injuries. About 20 days later, 5 former Memphis police officers were relieved of duty. They were indicted and arrested on murder charges, and we're going to talk more about those charges later on in the show. And there were also, I believe, 3 firefighters, 2 EMTs and 1 lieutenant that were also relieved of duty. And just recently, I believe there are 2 more officers that were relieved of duty. Just so much that has happened over the past few weeks. And frankly, as a mother of a Black son, I tell you, it is a lot to process, and it is just traumatic, the things that have been happening in our world. I want to bring on our guest, and we are so honored and elated to have with us today, Miss Gloria Sweet-Love, who is the state president of the NAACP here in the state of Tennessee. Attorney Van Turner, who is the president of the Memphis branch of the NAACP. Welcome to both of you, and thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to have this discussion, this needed discussion with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, so on Wednesday of this week, Tyre Nichols was funeralized here in Memphis. And his father had some words, and he said that this doesn't stop here. The fight doesn't stop here. He said this is a continuous fight. And I know that there's been so much that has been done over time, but how do you guys see this fight being different from anything that we've done in the past? What's going to be different about this fight?
Well, Dr. Shaw, I really do believe that maybe people have seen it in a different perspective. I think before we could always say, racism and white power and etc. And they've always done us that way. And we know that's true. But this time it really came home because, I grieve and I pray for all 6, now all 8, 9 families that are involved in this. I said, Attorney Turner will tell you, I said at the press conference that I've got 6 sons that are living, 3 sons and 3 grandsons. 5 of those live within the greater Memphis area. And, so my prayer every morning when I get up is, Lord, keep them safe. And every night when I go to bed is, Lord, keep them safe. So I think people sort of thought, well, now that, we have and especially in a city like Memphis, that's majority Black, we sort of didn't think maybe that this would happen. But the reality is, just as Police Chief C.J. Davis said, and we really commend her for her stance and her bravery, for really pushing back against the system. It is a culture, and until people get involved and really push back against the culture, I think it will continue to be that way. The other piece is, and we talked a little bit about it, and I'm going to hush and let Attorney Turner talk because he is so excellent and we are so proud of him and all that he does and how he has stood up. But the qualified immunity piece really does talk about the fact that I can almost do, I can almost just go do sort of what I want to do. And because of the laws and the union and etc. I'm not gonna. I don't have to take any personal liability for it. Whereas in most other cases, people are personally liable for what they do. But I think the thing that struck us the most is when we viewed the video and saw it was almost like they were at I want to say a party at a Super Bowl. They were just like standing around even after he had been beaten senseless, with no compassion. And this is a culture. This is not something that African Americans normally we are the compassionate ones. So for us to have allowed this culture to do us this way, it really, really does bother us.
Yeah, I would have to concur with President Sweet-Love. This was especially brutal and difficult to watch because there were five Black officers involved. And so, the race does make a difference, and it shouldn't, but it makes a difference to us because there was such a disappointment in these five brothers beating down and killing another brother. And so, as Reverend Sharpton said today, they fought, struggled. President Sweet-Love has been in this movement for a while. All those who have been in the movement fought and struggled against white people who were brutalizing and maiming and doing all matters of evil against us. But here you have five Black men who internalized and taking on that oppressor's mentality. They've lashed out and killed one of their own. And so that's just a disappointment. And it's hard to manage through that, to see that these were five Black men doing that to another Black man who was helpless, couldn't defend himself. They had the badges, the guns, and they just abused their power, and they abused Mr. Nichols. So there's a lot of soul searching Black America has to do. What have we become when we've eliminated the need of the Ku Klux Klan to some extent in our communities? We've taken on that role. And it's not just this, it's Black on Black violence. I mean, I grieve as much when our young men and women are gang banging and killing each other. There's no need for a citizens council or Ku Klux Klan or the neo-Nazis to come into Hickory Hill or South Memphis or North Memphis. We're killing ourselves. And unfortunately, we've had five Black officers turn into a gang, and they've killed one of their own. And so that's just such a disappointment. And we're still trying to navigate through all that we feel as it relates to that particular issue.
I spoke to a young lady who works for a police department in another state. And she reached out to me just to say, thinking about you guys and what's going on there in your city. And she was a little upset because some of her fellow officers, white officers, were saying, well, thank God they were Black, right? And that was really disturbing to her and to me too, to hear. And when I think about how I've heard that what Chief C.J. Davis is doing here in Memphis and how quickly they moved on this, that this is going to become a blueprint. I'm wondering, just the fact that they were Black, it was Black on Black, how do we view it as the blueprint in that light?
Well, I don't really think.
Go ahead, Ms. Sweet-Love.
No, go on, Van. No, go on.
I think that it's a blueprint for how swift the action was. That's the blueprint piece of it.
Right.
The fact that these were Black officers, that begs the question, would it have been the same if they were all white officers?
Exactly.
However, the blueprint should apply no matter the color or race of the officer. It should be, as was said today, 20 days. If the officers are white, if they were Black, Latino, Asian, doesn't matter. 20 days. We know action can be done in 20 days. And so that should be a new standard going forward.
Okay.
I listened to her. Yes. Chief Davis did an interview with 24 News, and it was excellent. The thing about it, what she talked about was the fact that it's a culture. She walked into this culture. The other thing, when I look back at what she has done in the Durham Police Department, the kinds of things she has seen and done in the Atlanta Police Department, I think I commend her for her courage. Anybody that has been in leadership roles know when you come behind a system that has been doing things a certain way forever, it is difficult. So her job is difficult. But the thing about it, she has no friends and folks she worked with when she was walking the beat and those kinds of things in the Memphis system. So some of that baggage she doesn't have. She's got the baggage of being Black and you know, from having managed folks. Black folks can always say to you, well, you know, the white folks get away with that. But what I've always said, and my son now repeats that, I have neither the complexion nor the connection to try to act like they act. So, you know, just when you stand for what is right, you know, often your own folks are going to be the folks that push back against you. So we know that's happening in her case, but I applaud her. I pray for her. And I think this is what has to happen. But even further than that, we have to, as leaders, we really have to push the envelope and continue to push and get those activists that were out there talking about what needs to happen, get them to go with us to the courthouses and to the state houses and to the capitals to push back and say it's time that we get legislation passed. We can get it passed if we be consistent and if we have the support that we need.
So when you were talking about the activists, I was thinking about the release of the video and how strategic they were, you know, around, you know, the release of the video. Did part of that have to do with the, you know, the activists and the them getting the people together to protest and making sure that it was going to be a peaceful protest? Because I felt like whoever it was did an excellent job, because things have gone really, really well in the city.
Yeah, and today at the funeral, they called out the names of the activists and the protesters, which was especially good because these are unsung heroes. These are people out here in this 29-degree weather, standing at the memorial, holding the signs and praying and chanting and demanding justice. And so they should be applauded and they should be lifted up as they were today at the memorial service. And bringing these individuals in is really the new model. You know, the young people in the 50s and 60s fought for the freedoms that we enjoy now. So it's always the young activists, the young people, that young energy that we shouldn't turn away, but we should embrace and we should align with and we should respect. And so that was done here. Nobody shunned them. They got out, they protested, and to Chief Davis's credit, she didn't turn a deaf ear. She heard them, she acted on their request, she met with them, she communicated with them. And so I think that really worked out well. In fact, they had a call with me. They didn't come to the NAACP office calling us Uncle Toms and y'all are sellouts and y'all are antiquated. It's time out for the NAACP. They called me and said, hey, these are our demands. what are your demands and how can we align? So no name calling and back and forth, which I thought was incredibly mature for these young activists. Because we hadn't seen that in history. It's been old against young, them against us. The NAACP is this, the Black Panthers and SNCC is that. So you don't have that here. And if not anything else, the aligning and coming together of Black Lives Matter and all these other activist groups is a good thing. And that's why you've seen peace and alignment and one voice and unity and togetherness. And hopefully that will remain, because I think we're much more effective when we come together in that way.
Yeah, the organizing was just phenomenal. Yeah.
I also think, Dr. Shaw, I also think that the fact that you guys know I've had a tragedy similar in my family. So it is never easy when somebody close in your family is killed. But I thought that this family just stood, I mean, they stood there, what they said and the way they stood is just, I mean, it is groundbreaking. They said, yes, they said, if you're gonna protest for you know, for him, we want you to do it peaceful. We wanted everything done peaceful. And the protesters listened to what they had to say. Because the thing about it is, you want action, but you can get, when you're reasonable and when you're, you know, nobody can say that, you know, you are, you know, oh, they can't discard what you say when you're being reasonable. And so I thought the protesters listened to the family. I thought Mr. and Ms. Wells and their family were just excellent in the way they said it, in the way they presented themselves. And I think we have to, you know, I was sitting there today thinking about Mothers Against Drunk Drivers changed laws across the nation when it talks about driving under the influence. You know, really, Mothers Against Victims could do the same thing. And I think that's what has to happen, is that we have to be consistent in the movement. We have to push toward making sure that there's community oversight. A policeman should not have to, they should not be able for their, you know, to do whatever they want to do, and nobody holds them accountable. They never have to face anybody to talk about what happened in this case. I mean, it just needs to happen.
Yeah. We are at a break. We are going to go to break, and we will be right back in a moment on 94.7 FM. And we are still here with Attorney Van Turner and with Ms. Gloria Sweet-Love, talking about the murder of Tyre Nichols at the hands of the Memphis police officers here in Memphis, Tennessee. I want to talk a little bit about the charges. There were second-degree murder charges. There was aggravated assault. There was aggravated kidnapping resulting in bodily injury. There was aggravated kidnapping involving possession of a weapon, official misconduct through unauthorized exercise power, as well as official misconduct through failure to act when there is a duty to imposed by the law. And then there was also an official oppression charge. So can we kind of walk through those and how we came up with those and what that even means in this case?
Yeah, I think the big point here is that the family wanted murder one, right?
They did.
And what ended up was murder two. I think out of all of those charges, those are your higher charges, which would result in the most time in jail. So I'll start there. Murder one has to be premeditated. There's been no evidence that these 5 officers pulled over Tyre Nichols that evening and premeditated his murder. So that's why they didn't do murder one. And they explained that to the family, and the family was fine with the murder two charge. Murder two is heat of the moment, heat of passion. You didn't premeditate the murder, but at a certain point in time, you developed the intent to murder, and you, in fact, murdered that individual. You knowingly killed him. I was asked about the knowing part a few days back, and I think that the knowing aspect comes in that 20-minute time period when they just allow Tyre's body to be slumped over and the life was leaving his body. You knew he was dying. You knew you had punched this boy, this young man, my apologies, this young soldier. And you knew that the life was leaving him. He said he couldn't breathe. He called out for his mother. You could look at his face and knew that he was dying. And so you knowingly murdered him at that point because you didn't render the aid to allow him to live. So that gets us to murder 2, kidnapping, because Tyre couldn't leave. And how did we get there? The stop was unlawful to begin with, so you had no legal reason to hold him. This was not a proper search and seizure, which is an exception to the 4th Amendment Constitution, which gives us all privacy. They don't have the right to just pull you over and keep you there for no reason. They got to have reasonable suspicion, probable cause. They got to smell the marijuana, see the drugs. They have to have observed you committing the crime, something to keep you. So when you don't have any of those elements that will allow you to seize an individual, then DA Moore says, well, it's kidnapping because you prevented him from going home. You seized him and then allow him to leave, which is kidnapping, aggravated kidnapping, and especially aggravated kidnapping means you hurt him. In this instance, you killed him, and you had weapons, your boots, your fists, and your batons. Official misconduct and some of those other charges are just charges that just show how they abuse their authority, abuse the badge that they wear, abuse the oath that they took. And basically, it was just a shame in what they did. So this comes to federal court by way of what they call a 1983 abuse of power, abuse of your authority under the color of law, excessive force. They acted outside the scope of their duties, and in doing so, they killed Tyre Nichols. Here, we would object to qualified immunity because qualified immunity gives you immunity if you act within your scope. Here, they acted outside the scope. They intentionally killed Tyre, so you don't get qualified immunity. And so those would be the arguments you see in federal court when this lawsuit is filed. And I think that there's a good shot that, now that's on the civil side. I jumped to the civil side. The civil side goes to federal court under 1983 action. The criminal law aspect of it stays in the Shelby County criminal courts, and that would be under DA Mulroy.
Okay.
So you have 2 things that you're going to have here: civil action and criminal action. And so I think that those charges are good. I have faith in our DA that he's going to make it happen. And as President Sweet-Love knows, elections have consequences, because had this been the Republican district attorney who was there until she was unseated by this Democratic progressive district attorney, who knows where we would be.
Wouldn't have happened.
So elections have consequences.
And
so that's right.
That's right.
That's a prime example. And we just elected him.
What do we expect? Do we expect a lot more to be brought to justice? There were a lot of officers standing out there. I don't know when they came on the scene, of course, but there were a lot of officers there by the time he was slumped over and leaning against a vehicle.
They already got 2 that they are investigating and charging. I think 2 that we know of. And listening to the chief, I think it might be more. What's your take, Van?
Yes, ma'am. So the 5 African American officers. There's been a 6th white officer. There's a 7th officer yet to be identified, but he's been named. He or she has been named. 3 EMTs. So that brings the count to 9.
9.
Yeah, no, 10 actually. And then you have 2 sheriff deputies. So that puts us to 12. So you have 12 involved thus far. And so there may be more. Here's the point. Anybody who was there when this started, who was there when they were brutalizing and beating Mr. Nichols, or anybody that was there those 20 minutes while the very life was leaving Mr. Nichols, they need to be terminated and indicted and brought to justice. If you were there in those 3 phases of this on January the 7th, at the beginning, in the middle, and at the end, you need to be brought into justice. You need to be relieved of duty, and you should suffer the consequences. I don't know what's worse. Was it the beating? Rodney King was beat in 91.
Yeah.
He lived.
Right.
Was it the beating, or was it them watching the very life leave this man for 20 minutes, and they could have saved him?
Right.
They could have saved him. He would have been broken. He would have been brutalized. He would have been hurt, but he would have been alive had they acted in those 20 minutes. That's critical. And they just allowed him to die.
Right.
They are just as culpable.
Right. Yeah. It just amazed me that he's there slumped on the ground, calling for help. You know, you can see he is just totally pitiful. And they're just standing around. I'm serious, like it's at a Super Bowl party. Yeah. It just amazed me, a man's inhumanity to man. And then for the EMTs to show up, and they say the lieutenant never even got out of the fire truck. Right. You to be called. I mean, you have become so desensitized with violence in the streets that you go to where they say someone is needing aid because you already know it's a police beating, and you are the senior person there, and you don't even get out of your vehicle. That's that is so difficult for me to take. That is so difficult. I say they must have been, something has to be done. I agree with the chief. It has to be the culture that you think it's all right to beat black boys in the dark. You think it's all right?
What would, in your opinion, what would police reform look like? What could happen that could be so effective that, you know, we've ended up with the law enforcement having to have the cameras, the body cams, and all, but there are always these loopholes, right? And people that want to do wrong, they find a way to do wrong. So what could it look like where we could, like, how do we get our boys home safe? How do we get our young men and our young women? How do we get them home safely?
But I spoke to a former police officer about that very same issue. A couple of things he pointed out. This Scorpion unit had tactical gear on, like what we call the SWAT team. And he said back in his day, you only wore that type of gear when you were on SWAT. And SWAT was only called out in the worst situations where you know what's in the room. And there is no Tyre Nichols behind that door. Yeah. The real deal is behind that door. So these guys come fully prepared, the guns, the whole nine, the battering ram, the armored cart, everything. Because they know Tyre Nichols, a skateboarder, is not behind that door. He says what has happened is the culture shifted when they started allowing these street units to have the tactical gear that was only really reserved for SWAT. And the mindset changes. All of this military gear that's left over, these bulletproof vests with all the ammo pockets in it, the side firearms on the legs, the big guns, the masks, the boots. And he says, you going to war in the community, you're not coming out to serve and protect the community. He said in his day, he could get more done in a t-shirt with just his regular firearm on the side and just talking with the young men and women. Learning who were the head of the street organizations, showing them a better way out of the game, showing them that they have options out of what they're dealing with now. And so that made the difference, he said, back when they really value community policing and not this unit that's only coming in to terrorize folks. So he says, take that tactical gear off, go back to community policing, only use the tactical gear for these SWAT teams, only call them in the most egregious circumstances. Don't put your beat officers on the beat on these simple traffic stops. Get your younger officers who are training to go handle car accidents, traffic stops. And so, better deployment of your officers. So he says those are just some of the things that he saw which worked in the past, which were eliminated. But if we return back to some of those things, he feels we could have better results. And the community policing is big. We just can't simply pour our resources into tactical gear and units and arresting our way out of the situation. That won't work. We need to equally pour our resources into combating poverty, better education, more wraparound resources, giving our young people options and things to do. That is equally as important. These young kids don't wake up. These young people don't wake up wanting to carjack and commit crimes and do all these things to survive because they want to. If given options, which will have them avoid death in jail, they'll pursue those options and take those options. So we equally have to be focused on pouring into these young people and not just arresting them.
Madam
I
President
firmly
Sweet-Love.
agree with.
Yeah, I was going to say to you,
I firmly agree.
I remember a time when we were, I'm sorry, I think we have a delay. I remember a time when we were in our churches, really stressing to our young folks, how you conduct yourselves when you encounter the police, right?
Right.
And I'm just wondering, is there ever going to really be a right way that, we can get them home safely?
Right. I agree with Van. I really do think that going back to community policing and going back to policemen's walking the beat, knowing what's going on. I think maybe a year or so ago, as a matter of fact, I think when they were having the town hall meeting, Van, and talking about what they need to do with policing in Memphis and Shelby County, one of the things that came up was the fact the police union used to have actually have softball teams, and they and baseball teams, and they had basketball teams. Those are the kinds of things. So get involved with the community. Then you know who the young people are. Then they know and respect you, because what is needed so much is when we talk about in those areas where they were talking about putting the Scorpion Squad, is male figures. We need Black male figures there, so young people will have somebody to look up to. So that is needed so very much. So yes, I agree. And Rhonda, you remember we used to do a program in NAACP called the 411 on the 50, and they talked about how you conduct yourself if stopped by a policeman. So there's mutual respect on both sides. But I have to agree with Van. Whoever that policeman was, he had the right idea. That's the kinds of things that need to happen. We don't need SWAT teams policing our neighborhoods and then stopping our children on a proposed traffic stop. You all do know that Chief Davis said she don't think that's true at all. She don't believe at all that it was a traffic violation. She don't think they had any reason to stop him. So, but we've got to change the culture. That's the piece of all the things. Tyre's death is a tragedy, but watching that video and watching their attitudes, you all, was so tragic to me, because when it looks like you're having the kind of conversations you would have outside in the backyard when you attending a barbecue at a Super Bowl party, and you just nonchalant. I mean, this also says to me that this is regular business for you. That they're talking about having now a town hall meeting to see how many other people have been affected by this unit and their behavior. but it was real clear to me, this is not the first time. We are very comfortable having beat this young man to death. He slumped over, and you know, we talking about, oh, okay, if we really putting our story together, what we gonna put on paper. So that's the real concern. So I think breaking that culture down, and you know, and she talked about the fact that she does not have enough supervision. The other thing is, you know, I really think you got to go back to being really critical. They talked about that they didn't have, experience in law enforcement before, but I don't think that's a bad thing, because I think when you hire some of these people that have worked in some of the counties outside of Memphis and whatever, they already come with something. I have sat on the post commission for the state of Tennessee, and that's peace officers training and standards. And you know, they write the standards, but they also they are the folks that run the academy, and they are the folks that give exemptions if needed. And what you will see, because you guys know I was probably the only person of color sitting there, and the only woman there. But what you see come before for exemptions a lot of times are things that exemptions should not be given. So, when you talk about breaking down structural racism, is those kinds of things also that have to be broken down.
I was very pleased with Chief Davis's transparency in all of this, and you know, seeing her on the national news channels and being asked certain questions, and with the one that you just mentioned, do you think this was a valid stop? I don't see any evidence that there was, right? And I was like, she's not trying to cover up. It's total transparency, and I think that's going to align with how we rebuild trust between law enforcement and the community. And I'd like to talk about that when we come back from break. We'll be right back in a moment on 94.7 FM.
Okay.
We're back on Doctor2Doctor in the chat room here on 94.7 FM. Let's talk a little bit about how we can rebuild trust between law enforcement and our communities. I mean, over the years, we've had all of these incidents being played out in real time. People have seen it. We've got technology, cell phones, folks are recording. And even with that, the numbers are still astonishing. These cases that we continue to see over and over again. This is just a repeat of a movie over and over again. How can we rebuild that trust?
Well, let me make some statements and say something, and then I will give it to Van, who is really our expert. What I say all the time is that what we are now seeing is what has been happening all the time. The difference is we now have immediate cell phones and videos. It used to be it would never be caught on camera, so it would the person's word or the bystander's word against the policeman. Now you've got instant cell phone video, and it's being streamed somewhere as it's happening. So that technology makes a difference there. I think being transparent, really going to the community to really find out what is needed and trying to address that need. The other thing is, I'm not letting anybody off the hook here. The reason our communities are the way they are is because churches and community groups are not putting back into the community.
Wow.
The real deal is, most of the time what happens is that most of the time those churches in our neighborhoods, the pastors and sometimes the officers don't live in their neighborhood anymore. So little boys don't have anybody to look up to. And I know that we've got female crime also, but we're talking about saving little black boys. And that's of the ultimate importance to me, because as I said again, I got 4 sons and 3 grandsons and 1 great-grandson. So I want black boys saved. But I think the community has to invest you gotta start putting back into it. You know, you gotta be, you gotta be the change they see. You know, they want to emulate folks, that the drug dealers and the folks with, all the flashy stuff, because you understand, you coming for a few hours on Sunday and you taking your Mercedes and going on back to Collierville or Germantown or wherever. We've got to spend some time in those communities. You know, we're dealing with third grade retention, and most people, where the kids that need the most help, the parents either don't know how to help them, they are working 2 jobs. The community has to step up, and churches have to do what the scriptures say, you are your brother's keeper. We got to step up and do what we need to do, whether it's tutoring, whether it's mentoring, all of the above. And when we do that, when we make sure that the churches are open so the kids can have ping pong games and basketball games and tennis games and all of that, when we make these beautiful buildings that we got, when we make them available to the community, it will make the difference. That's what we got. That's what we got to do. It takes all of us. We can't say, well, law enforcement, you got to do that. Somebody's got to help train them kids from the beginning to the end, and it's possible. They are trainable. You know, we put more focus now on our chihuahua and them cute little dogs that we put in the bags than we do on trying to help children. Van, take it.
You know, when you talk about the churches, I think about, during the civil rights movement, the church was like that foundational piece during the where everything happened. And I don't understand why our faith-based organizations aren't, you're right, we're not doing all that we can do to help mobilize our communities.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, and that is so different from the civil rights movement, where the churches were the hub of the activity.
Yes.
The movements, the strategy sessions, all of that was born out the Black church. The leaders in our churches were also on the forefront of the marches and the protests and the demonstrations and the boycotts. And so we have gotten too comfortable. We've forgotten from whence we've come. If you look at the Jewish community, they say never forget. So consequently, they still reinforce what they had to endure with the Holocaust and how they made it over. And they do that so that history will not repeat itself. So unfortunately, I think we should not be in a situation where we've forgotten. And that's unfortunate. We ought to be reminded of the struggle, pass this on down to our children and grandchildren so they can continue the struggle and continue the fight. So much is required of everyone, but in particular, our clergy, they have such influence still in the community. And so we have to double down and make sure that we are aligning with our clergy like we did years back in order to make sure that this movement continues and that Tyre Nichols' death is not in vain. We can't do it by ourselves. NAACP can't do it by itself. We're going to need clergy. We're going to need all the other civil rights groups. We're going to need the young activists. We're going to need Black Lives Matter. We're all going to need each other in order to get this done. This is an all-in proposition. Nobody gets to be on the sidelines now.
Do you think we can rebuild that trust? And do you think the community can, after something like this, can have faith because we can see it, in real time? What do you think we can have faith in law enforcement again? Because I'm gonna share this, and I haven't shared it publicly. We had a lot of trouble with like getting our tags, getting our renewed and all that, right? So every year I go online and I order mine, and and they come in a couple of days. But of course, this time it took them quite a while to come. On New Year's Day, I was pulled over because my tags were out. And when I was pulled over, I immediately pulled up my phone and pulled up my email to show that I'd ordered my tags and,
Mhm.
figuring, I'm right here. They know what's going on, right? So shouldn't be that big a deal. What I went through and the fear that I felt from my encounter with those two officers that day, it's just really unbelievable. And one came, they were taking turns coming back to the car. And I was like, I've shown him that, I've shown him my insurance. I've shown him that I've ordered my tags. But then he asked me for my registration. He sent the other officer to come and ask me for my registration. And I said, wouldn't I get that with my tags? You get your registration thing with your tag. He said, no, ma'am.
Right.
He said, no, ma'am. And I said, well, sir, all I can give you is the one that expired yesterday. Because I don't have the current one. They kept me for about 47 minutes. And I don't know what they were doing, but it became so uncomfortable. And my car was kind of in the road a little. So I just moved a little to come out of the road because the cars were coming and, having to go around. When I started moving, he laid on that horn and he told me, no. Now, I don't know where he thought I was going or what. And I know it was nothing that they could have been pulling up about, checking it in terms of checking my background or whatever. So I felt really uncomfortable. This was before Tyre Nichols incident. I felt really uncomfortable. And I was like, now, if somebody had said to me, I'm training an officer, so just be patient. You're fine. We see that, just something to make me feel comfortable. And then the Tyre Nichols incident happens. First thing I thought about was that day, like, what if I had asked, what did I do? What if I had asked,
So Dr. Shaw, let me ask a question. Let me ask the question. But did you report that? Did you send a complaint in about that?
I was talking to my goddaughter about it. And I said, one of the things that happens, when you're caught off guard and you're panicking or whatever, I heard when he walked to my car, he said, I'm Officer so-and-so. But because of what I went through, I didn't even remember. I walked away and didn't even remember what their names were. So that's all on me. But I'm just saying how easy it is for something simple to turn into something major.
Right. Well, one of the things that we always teach in 411 on the 50 is that one of the first things we tell young people to do is say good evening, good morning, whatever, yes sir and no sir, but find out, look at that officer's badge and his number and etc. And and even even if you take a picture of it with your phone, but look at it, because that's important. Because if you can't identify them, you really can't file a complaint. But I don't think enough people file complaints. You guys know I just believe in filing complaints. Because if you don't say anything, they feel like it's okay. And really see, as adults, we really have to speak up and complain for the young people, because see, a lot of times, they will get very emotional or whatever, and what I've always told the boys, don't get upset, count, do whatever you need to do. And we used to tell Jason when he was driving from Brownsville to Cookville, up 40, we tell him, keep your hands on the steering wheel, say yes sir, no sir, yes sir, I'm leaving my parents' house, I'm going back to school in Cookville. And we used to tell him, try not to get out. You don't need to get out of there weighing 300 pounds and 6'2". They don't need to see the linebacker, on the side of the road. And tell them, whatever happens, don't try to fix it, because come home and tell us and then we'll deal with it. But we don't want you to be a statistic. But there are some things that we really have to talk about and talk to citizens about your rights. You got a right to be polite. Dan, take it.
Now, that's unfortunate what happened to you. And, that fear is what we're talking about now. Part of what I think Tyre felt that night was fear.
Yeah.
just fear the
Yes.
unknown because he knew he hadn't done anything. And so he runs for his life, as what any reasonable person would have done.
What did I do?
So I know that Tyre's dad at the funeral Wednesday spoke of the George Floyd bill. It may have been his mom talking about getting that passed. And I think there's another bill that you're proposing. Will you talk about those and how they may impact situations like this?
Absolutely. The Tyre Nichols, the proposal that the parents have is a proposal which has the Tyre Nichols police reform bill to be put forth in the Tennessee General Assembly. And this will feature a duty to intervene, a duty to de-escalate, a duty to assist. And as we know, the aid can't wait policy, which was born out of the movement after the murder of George Floyd, memorializes a lot of those policy points in the aid can't wait platform. So basically, what they are hoping to do is to distill that down and to memorialize that into a Tyre Nichols police reform bill, which could hopefully pass through the Tennessee General Assembly and become state law.
Okay.
And essentially, those are the highlights: duty to intervene, duty to de-escalate, duty to render aid, duty to ban the chokehold and other moves that were used to kill Tyre. So that's the Tyre Nichols bill, and obviously it mirrors the George Floyd bill in Congress. This would just be applicable as a statewide law.
So what are I want you guys to just share some final thoughts as we kind of wind down in our last few minutes here. We've got about 5 minutes, and just share some final thoughts around where we are, what our next steps, could be to move this needle a lot more, not just a little bit, but to move this needle a lot more so that we are safer, our children are safer.
Well, one of the things we would do as the NAACP is push forward to try our very best to make sure that there is community oversight in every city. We really would like to see it statewide, but really Memphis has some legislation, but they almost, it's almost non-existent. It's a committee, but it doesn't meet. So we're gonna try to be working with the commission and with whoever needs to be to try to push that forward. As you just heard Attorney Turner say, we will push for the Tyre Nichols bill. We'll be trying to work to get sponsors and supporters and etc. All that. The other thing is we really want to push for communities to be involved, and that's from the faith-based community to community activists. We're all in this together to push for police reform and transparency. Transparency, the whole point of it, had not Chief C.J. Davis been as transparent as she was, we think circumstances would have been a lot different. We have a whole Memphis today, whereas I think we might have had just a shell of it had she not been as transparent and had the people not stood the way they did. So hats off to Chief C.J. Davis, to my excellent president, Attorney Van Turner, for their leadership and of really talking to the people, and the way you discuss something can make a difference between it becoming explosive and us being able to reason. Van?
Before you come with your final thoughts, Attorney Turner, one of the things when she mentioned transparency, when that 6th officer was charged, there was a statement by Attorney Ben Crump that said, well, we thought it was transparency, but obviously they weren't being as transparent.
Yeah.
Do you think that there's a lack of transparency, or do you think it's just about the process in terms of how these officers are being charged? And brought on charges?
Yeah, I think it's about the process. I mean, obviously we know Hemp Hill, he's been relieved now. We're not too far gone in time. We're still within the scope and range of when this is happening real time. There's a seventh officer that will come out. I think probably they started with the most egregious acts and behavior, and then they're going from there. You start at the point of death, which would, you know, indict those 5 officers, the EMTs, the deputies that were there, and then you go back from there. And now they're backing it up to the start of this. Hemp Hill is involved now, and then, you know, I think that's just part of the investigation. I don't think they're trying to cover it up.
Okay.
And so, unfortunately, the list keeps growing, and more officers are being sought out and being pointed out as not doing what they vowed to do, which is, again, unfortunate. But I think we can heal from this. We can rebuild. There is a brighter future. And some of the things that we've talked about, going back to community policing, getting rid of this toxic culture, so on and so forth, I think will help heal that relationship between the community and law enforcement. That's something we have to do. Al Sharpton said, we should no longer, as a community, be satisfied or have to endure being afraid of the robber and the cops.
That's right.
We're afraid of everybody in the community. We can't trust either one. So both are preying on us, and, you know, time out for that. So we got to heal this relationship because the community deserves it, and we need to do so. So I'm happy to be here with you this evening. I think this has been a great conversation with you, Dr. Shaw, my President Sweet-Love, and the struggle continues, and we will continue to fight for justice for Tyre.
Absolutely. And thank you both again. I cannot thank you enough. I know that both of you have a lot going on in this season. So thank you for being here. And as always, thank you guys for coming back. And we look for you to be back with us next Saturday, same chat channel, same chat time, right here on Dr. to Doctor in the Chat Room on 94.7 FM. We will see you then.